When people talk about standout games from the Xbox 360, PS3 era, Enslaved Odyssey to the West does not come up at all. It's one of those games that kind of slipped through the cracks, and a lot of people don't even remember it. Despite some pretty solid critical reception, it didn't exactly light up the sales charts either. The game sold around 460,000 copies worldwide by the end of the release year, which, to be real, is pretty underwhelming for what was supposed to be a major release from Ninja Theory. Now, Ninja Theory made games previously like Heavenly Sword on the PS3, I don't know if any of you remember that. They then went on to make DMC, and their most recent release was the Hellblade series. But yeah, back to Enslaved, it's not too surprising that they never made a sequel. It's almost like from the beginning, Enslaved was destined to be one of those games people just kind of forgot. No follow-up, no remasters, just a one and done. But for some people who did play it, Enslaved still holds a certain charm. If you're new here, I'm Once Faded. I love jumping into PS3, Xbox 360 games, and just, giving my thoughts on them. So if you're like me and like that sort of stuff, that sort of vibe, that era, consider subscribing. Right now I'm only on 50 subscribers, but some of my past videos have been doing crazy. I thank you for all the support on them. Well, crazy to me, considering I have 50 subscribers. But yeah, big goals for the channel, so, join the movement. Subscribe, like, let me know what you think in the comments, and yeah, let's jump into it. Now, Enslaved loosely is based off a 16th century Chinese novel, Journey to the West. And I myself haven't played or watched Dragon Ball, but apparently it's kind of similar and has a bit of an influence there. So the developers Ninja Theory decided to take a story set in a futuristic, post-apocalyptic world. Now, to be honest, the environment is beautiful, and to me is one of the standouts for this whole game. And I didn't necessarily like the whole game too much. We'll get into that later. But as for the environment, it was amazing. It was like crumbling cities overrun by greenery. Like from that first scene when we're flying down into New York City and you just see the world. And another main premise of the game is the relationship between the two main characters. And that's Monkey and Trip.
If we're gonna get through this, then when I ask you to do something, you need to do it immediately.
And I think this quote from the development team really nails in what they were trying to achieve with the game. Quote, "We wanted to create an emotional relationship between the characters that would evolve organically throughout the story." End quote. And that is pretty much exactly what we got. But for me, it didn't hit emotionally the way that I think they wanted it to. To me, it felt like more a gameplay mechanic than a genuine character bond. So speaking of that character bond, I'll quickly jump into the story. So as mentioned, you play as the main character, Monkey, a big, strong loner who was captured by slavers at the very beginning of the game. After that slave ship crashes, he wakes up to find himself attached to a headband that Trip, a tech-savvy young woman, has put on him. Now this headband binds Monkey to Trip, so if she dies, he dies.
And your voice, it's like, it's inside my goddamn head.
It is. We have a continuous audio link now.
So, Trip basically forces Monkey to escort her back home across this dangerous post-apocalyptic landscape. Now this sets up an interesting power dynamic between the two characters. On one hand, Monkey is physically stronger and way more capable, but he's also trapped, literally enslaved by Trip's technology. But Trip is vulnerable and can't survive on her own, but she's got the brains to control Monkey through this headband. Now obviously over the game, they start to bond, but like I said, I didn't find it as compelling as the developers had wished it was. Throughout the game, the world is littered with remnants of humanity's downfall. Ancient, overgrown cities, hostile mechs, heaps of hostile mechs, and slaver camps. Now these mechs are the main enemies you will fight, and they come in various forms, big, small, fast, slow. But after a while, they all blur together. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit further down the line. Now eventually, throughout the story, you learn more about what happens to the world and the mechs. Towards the end of the story, it takes a more philosophical turn where Monkey and Trip reach the final destination, a place controlled by a mysterious figure known as Pyramid. Turns out Pyramid has been using these mechs to enslave what's left of humanity, plugging them into a virtual reality-like system to give them a sense of peace while the real world crumbles around them. Sounds very similar to a 2000s movie that was very popular in my opinion. And then the game ends on a bit of a cliffhanger where Trip shuts down the pyramid, freeing all the enslaved humans, but leaving them confused in their lost, desolate world. And at the end there's even an ambiguous moment where Monkey questions if maybe living in that illusion was better than the harsh reality that they're now facing. And that's kind of where it leaves you, which felt a bit unsatisfying to me. Maybe they hope for more sales to then make a sequel, but that's where they left it. But it's sort of a kick in the nuts to play that whole game and then just be left with a question instead of a resolve. Maybe that was the point, but for me, it felt the story just kind of ended on a question. That's not great. So moving on to the main thing about games, the gameplay. And this is where things really started to drag for me. Enslaved is an action-adventure game with a lot of platforming and a lot of combat, but neither of these elements really feel fleshed out enough to keep you engaged for the entire game. The combat system revolves around Monkey's staff, which is both a melee and ranged weapon. At first, it feels cool, it feels decent. You can chain a few combos together, dodge in, and then mixing in some ranged attacks. But as the game progresses, you start to realize that the combat never really evolves. You're essentially doing the same handful of combos against slightly different versions of the same mech enemies. Sure, you can upgrade your abilities and health, but the upgrades feel minor. And even the way that you upgrade these is just by collecting orbs around the map. It's kind of, not that cool. And by hour 2 and 3, I was pretty much on autopilot during the combat encounters. IGN review hit the nail on the head saying, quote, "The combat starts off strong, but after a few hours, you realize you've already seen all it has to offer." End quote. And I couldn't agree more. And the platforming, while visually impressive, is super linear. You're just tapping A. You jump from point A to point B and the game doesn't let you stray from that path. It's more like playing an interactive cutscene rather than exploring an actual world. With this amazing world, I was wishing for more freedom to explore it, but the gameplay just didn't let me. Then there's the main thing that I personally hated so much, and that was the buddy system. You're always with Trip, and while she can be useful sometimes to distract enemies or hack doors, most of it feels like you're just escorting her and she's holding you back. You're constantly having to babysit her, and it distracts from the action. I even forgot her a bunch of times and just left her hanging. And I never felt like her presence enhanced gameplay. If anything, it just slowed things down. But I will mention, one of the few things that actually spiced up the gameplay for me was Monkey's hoverboard. As soon as I got it, this was about the time I was getting bored of the game and I was like, wow, this is cool. It's so sick. It's a futuristic hoverboard that lets you zip around the environment at high speeds. It's a bit like SSX Tricky meets Mad Max. And honestly, I wish there was more of it. The hoverboard sections are fast, fun, giving you a break from the more slower and repetitive combat. The first time I got on it, I thought, okay, now we're getting somewhere. But sadly, the game doesn't let you use it nearly enough. These moments are few and far in between, and by the time you get a taste for it, you're back to the slow-paced sections. It honestly felt like a missed opportunity to really lean into something unique. Imagine if this game had open world sections where you could use the hoverboard to explore on an even much larger scale. Instead, it's just more of a novelty than a core mechanic. Now, I feel like I've already said it a bunch, but I'm gonna say it again, is one of the things Enslaved absolutely nails. It's the visuals and the world. It is genuinely gorgeous. And it's not just me who thinks so. Even the harsher critics of the game acknowledge that the visuals were a standout feature. The post-apocalyptic world is so unique on how it depicts a future reclaimed by nature. Then you've got these massive overgrown skyscrapers, dense forests, overtaking what used to be cities. It's kind of a contrast that really makes you stop and admire your surroundings. And I found myself doing that a lot more than I thought I would. At a time where so many games were leaning into the grey, gritty, browns and all that, Enslaved felt like a breath of fresh air. And I'm definitely not alone in thinking this. A review from Game Informer praised the game's visuals saying, quote, "Enslaved paints a picture of the apocalypse that is vibrant and full of life, a far cry from the drab grey tones we're used to seeing." End quote. It's almost ironic that the world is so beautiful, but everything you do within it feels repetitive. It's like on one hand, you just want to stop and take in the scenery, soak in the details of the world, but on the other, the game keeps pushing you forward, funneling you down these linear paths without giving you much room to explore. I think this is where the game missed a huge opportunity. Like I said with the hoverboard, imagine if this was an open world game and you could really just explore the place freely, instead of mostly being stuck on rails, moving from one set piece to the next. Speaking on other worlds being grey and this one being a lot more vibrant, I'm going to have to compare it to some other games that came out around the same time. So Enslaved came out in 2010. This was actually a pretty big year. You've got Red Dead Redemption, Mass Effect 2, Bioshock 2, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, and a lot of these just did way better than Enslaved, to bluntly put it. So realistically, Enslaved didn't really stand a chance unless it was a super innovative game. And compared to those, Enslaved just feels super underwhelming. Like, it's not a bad game, it's just that, compared to the other ones, it falls very short. At the time, the game was receiving, 8s, 7s around the board. Metacritic, you know, you got the low 80s, which on the surface seems pretty solid, but if you dig a little deeper into the reviews, you start to see the pattern of, you know, the repetitive gameplay, the boring enemies, and so on. Pretty much all the reviews praise the visuals. I know a lot of people don't agree with IGN reviews, but their reviews saying, quote, "While Enslaved is a gorgeous and unique experience, its shallow gameplay mechanics and lack of variety hold it back from being truly great," end quote. And that's the key here. It's not that Enslaved is a bad game, it's just not a great one. It has moments of brilliance, but they're overshadowed by repetitive combat and the linear level design. And the story, while good, wasn't amazing. Now there's definitely people out there who loved this game. If you look at some user reviews, you'll find plenty of fans who appreciate the story and the emotional connection between Monkey and Trip. So with all that being said, it's pretty obvious where I stand on this game. Looking back, it's actually one of those games that would just sit on the shelf. You know, you'd always see the cover art and think, wow, that looks cool, but you'd never play it. And when you play it, you sort of understand why. Would I recommend it to someone today? Maybe. Maybe. If you're someone that can overlook repetitive gameplay for the sake of a beautiful world and pretty solid voice acting and story, then it might be worth your time. But if you're looking for a good game overall that's going to engage you from start to finish with good mechanics, this probably isn't it. In the end, Enslaved Odyssey to the West is a game with a lot of potential but never quite lived up to it. For me, it's a solid 6 or 7. Good, but not great. And in a year like 2010, when there were so many other incredible games to choose from, that's just not enough to make it stand out. But I do want to hear what you guys think about the game if you've played it, if you're going to play. Let me know in the comments. And yeah, if you enjoyed this, drop a like and consider subscribing. I'm going to be uploading a lot more videos. Like, I plan to make this channel pretty big. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.